And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 80. This is the Week 17 recap episode where we're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals getting back to 500, getting to 8-8, keeping their postseason hopes alive by defeating the Denver Broncos 30-24 in overtime in a extremely exciting but also a very long and stressful, nail-biting game that could have gone either way. It looked like the Bengals were going to try to lose this game like 5 different ways. This game felt like the Ravens game from earlier this season that they lost in overtime. Very similar. Watching this game, it felt like, oh no, this is happening again. This is how it ends. This is going to be just like every other game this season. But no, finally, for once this season, the Bengals had a win over a team with a winning record. And maybe the Denver Broncos weren't as real as their 9-6 record coming into this game suggested, but they also didn't have a lot of great wins over quality opponents either. And so maybe the fact that the Bengals were favored going into this game by 3.5 points was no surprise. And I guess, I don't know how the betting works. If you go to overtime, does it count as a put cover? I don't know. But the point is, the Bengals, they went into overtime 24-24. This was a relatively low-scoring game. It wasn't one of these games where the defense gave up like 40-something points and the offense just had to keep pace with them. It was much the opposite, relatively low-scoring throughout much of the game, except the very end. In the fourth quarter, there was actually 28 combined points scored. Both teams scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to kind of up the scoring, but most of the game, very low-scoring defensive battle, and just questionable decision-making offensively by both teams, you could say, or maybe just good defense. Although some of the players on defense we'll talk about didn't exactly have the best games on either side of the ball. But in this podcast, I want to break it down from my own perspective. I haven't listened to any other podcasts. I haven't even listened to Zach Taylor's press conferences because I have had my fill of Zach Taylor. I know already what he's going to say about how he knew the whole time that they were a good team, and I don't know what the difference was. They've won 4 games in a row now. Everybody's going to say, what if the Bengals had won this game or that game or the other thing, and what if their record was different right now? I would ask, because I don't care, everybody can have those conversations. What about, okay, the Bengals are 8-8 right now. They've won the last 4 games in a row. What if the order of these games would play differently, not changing any of the opponents or any of the outcomes? Obviously, the injuries are going to take place at a certain point in the season. You can't control that. But let's just say they played all these different teams and had the same record now at 8-8, but they, instead of winning the last 4, they had lost the last 4. Instead of being 4-8, let's say 4 games ago, they were 8-4. Everybody would have been talking about how the Bengals were in the driver's seat for the division, going back to the playoffs. Joe Burrow would be, maybe the leader for the MVP. And then all of a sudden, if they lost 4 games in a row, people would be questioning that. What's going on? Bengals are falling off a cliff. Everything's, going downhill. The season's going to be over. So at this point, it's a recency bias. I feel like there's a lot of positive feelings and optimism, and, it's the holiday season. And from a financial perspective, if you want to be totally cynical about things, Mike Brown has got to be loving this, right before Christmas, and everybody's, getting the holiday bonuses and spending money. Oh, kids, what do you want? Who's hot right now? Nobody's hotter than the Cincinnati Bengals. All those kids asking for their Joe Burrow jerseys for Christmas. I'm sure, if the Bengals had lost all those games right before Christmas, maybe some of those kids wouldn't have asked mom and dad. But, you got to make those I'm thinking way too much into this. Like I said, I'm not Mike Brown. I don't get any of the proceeds from this. But Bengals, as much fun as this game was to watch, if I had any hair, I would have pulled all of it out because there were some frustrating moments all the way out throughout this game. The crowd, I'm sure, was loving it. It looked like a full house at Paycor Stadium. And This game was on Saturday at 4:30, and thankfully they didn't use some kind of like NFL Network backup announcers. In previous years, NFL Network has come into this with like some second string announcers who don't normally call NFL games. So the quality of the announce crew in past seasons has not been as good in some of these NFL Network Saturday games. But this time, they got the CBS announced team of Kevin Harlan, Trent Green, Melanie Collins on this one. It was another Kevin Harlan game. So that's why it felt like those Ravens games where Kevin Harlan was just losing his mind on some of these insane plays that happened throughout there. There was a lot of crazy plays that happened in this game. So many questionable calls that could have gone either way, and they had to bring in Gene Steratore. Gene, what do you think about this? Gene, what about that? Was his knee down? Was the ball moving? Did he have 2 feet in? Was it 3 steps? Oh, it could go either way. Just like so many different calls. Penalties that were kind of borderline. Was that really a penalty? Did this guy actually get concussed? Is he like faking being healthy and continuing to play through a concussion for this entire game? Is that why this guy is not playing very well? A lot of questionable things that happened in this game, and we may never get a lot of answers to all this. We also saw Amarius Mims make another early exit from the game. 2 series, I think, same thing as last game. Amarius Mims, he played with the club on his right hand. So the first round pick, Amarius Mims, number 71 at right tackle, he was out there with that club on. I think he went the first maybe 2 or 3 series, but eventually had to come out and got replaced by number 76, Devin Cochran. And obviously a step down, but we didn't see any more altercations on the sidelines with him and head offensive line coach Frank Pollock. We don't know what happened between them. Maybe Zach Taylor. I'm sure Zach Taylor didn't say anything about it in his press conference. There's another all good. We'll have to see. We'll play it by ear, day to day, etc. But he was out. On the other hand, Orlando Brown Jr., he was able to play and make it all the way through this game and looked relatively good. He looked better than he did the last time we saw him when he was playing against the Steelers and absolutely couldn't move at all. So apparently he's playing through some kind of a fibula fracture. I don't know if it's a stress fracture, how it happened. He's able to play through it. I'm assuming he's probably getting shot up with painkillers or something to be able to play through it. Hopefully he's able to make it through the rest of the season. Speaking of injuries, before this game, who else didn't make it? Charlie Jones was not able to make the dance. No Sheldon Rankins. He's probably not going to play for the rest of the season. Sam Hubbard is out, obviously. So all the guys that we haven't seen are continuing to not play. I don't know why they don't put some of these guys on injured reserve. Like Charlie Jones, this is his 8th game in a row that he's been questionable for. Like, I think at this point we can just call it a wrap on Charlie Jones' season if he's been out for 8 weeks in a row. We don't suddenly need Charlie Jones for anything, I don't think. So he can stay on the sidelines. And at one point in the game, they were discussing Evan McPherson, and they put the camera on Charlie Jones, and Kevin Harlan was like, there he is! But it was not him. It was Charlie Jones. That was funny. That's about the only thing, entertainment value, I've gotten out of Charlie Jones this season outside that one touchdown he had against the Browns. But anyway, back to this game. The fact that Sam Hubbard and some of these other guys, Sheldon Rankins, did not play, even though they are, taking up a lot of salary cap for the Bengals. They haven't contributed a lot on the field. That means guys like Joseph Osai, even the rookie Cedric Johnson got a little bit of playing time. McKinley Jackson, Chris Jenkins, those rookies are getting more experience, and they're starting to play a little bit better. And also number 59, Akeem Davis-Gaither, the linebacker who's stepping into that Logan Wilson role. I think maybe Jermaine Pratt has taken over the middle linebacker role at points, but it's him and Akeem Davis-Gaither, number 59. He had a couple of positive contributions in this game, played better than he has, looked better, wasn't missing so many tackles. That was another thing. On defense, the Bengals tackled a lot better in this game. Not nearly as many missed tackles as we had seen from the Bengals defense in previous games. So that was a positive thing. And I should have started off with this. Maybe the best thing for the Bengals that happened was before the game, It looked like no rain. No rain happened in this game, and that let Joe Burrow continue to have a great over 80% completion percentage. Bengals offense, passing game wise, dominated the Broncos on defense. Even though the Broncos held them to no points on multiple drives, they couldn't stop Joe Burrow in the passing attack. They did sack Joe Burrow 7 times, however. They hit him 15 times. He was under heavy pressure, but most of the time he was able to find the open receiver quickly enough, got the ball out of his hands before the Broncos could get there and force any kind of bad decisions by Joe Burrow. He didn't have any interceptions, no fumbles by Joe Burrow. And so if it had rained, basically the Bengals got super lucky because, just a couple hours after the game ended, it started raining and it basically hasn't stopped raining since then. It seems like a hurricane has come through this part of the country and it's just been nonstop rain for the past 5 days. So the Bengals and the Broncos, they were concerned about the rain as well. I don't know that the Broncos passing game would have been any more successful than the Bengals, but I think if it came down to a game where neither team could have passed, that would have been a huge advantage for the Broncos because it seemed like the Broncos had a much stronger running game. We didn't see the Bengals defense, give up too many missed tackles or any huge runs, but there were quite a few runs the Broncos were able to bust off with Jaleel McLaughlin, where he was getting, it seemed like 13, 14, 15 yards a carry, like back-to-back plays. And there was a point at the end of the game where I was saying, man, the Broncos should never pass at all. They should just run because they were getting first downs. It seemed like every play running the ball. But some questionable decision-making throughout this game by Sean Payton. And it was different coaching philosophies going up against each other. There was the Bengals, on the one hand, who were being super aggressive because they had to win. So I guess, they weren't playing for a tie. They weren't playing to lose. They're playing to win. So Zach Taylor was ultra aggressive, and it didn't really work out to start the game because the Bengals, their first 2 drives of the game ended on fourth down, not making it, failed fourth downs where they just gave the ball back to Denver and scoring 0 points. So that aggressiveness did not work out because they could have taken a field goal. They could have taken the points, decided to go for it, and didn't get anything. And that was when they were down by 3-0. So they could have tied up the game multiple times, but Zach Taylor decided to be aggressive, and that left the Bengals still trailing. It did work out once at the end of the game where they went for it on a key fourth down. They threw the well-designed pass to Chase Brown on a slant route, picked up the fourth down conversion that kept the drive going, that ended up in a touchdown. A go-ahead touchdown, critical moment in the game. But, if you only are successful once out of the 3 times you did it, I don't know if I would count on that as a successful strategy going forward. But after the game, questions like that, or I guess the other thing is they have Cade York as their kicker. And so we don't know what he looks like in practice, but Cade York did miss a critical field goal that would have won the game for the Bengals at the end of the game. 2.5 minutes left to go in overtime. I'm skipping all the way to the end here. But in overtime, 24-24, Cade York misses a 33-yard field goal, dunks it off the left upright. It's like a straight to the left pull. And he's obviously distraught. And then you hear the fans booing him as if he wanted to miss it, like he missed it on purpose. They're like, "Boo, I hate you, blah, blah, blah." Fans, I don't really get behind the booing of the players like that, but whatever. They want to express. The people boo when the Bengals call a timeout. I don't get why people boo a timeout. What, they think you can take them home with you? You use that's the point of having the timeouts, is to use them. Why are you booing? You don't see that in basketball, where if a coach calls a timeout in basketball, people don't boo. I don't get that. People act like timeouts are so valuable. If you need a timeout, call timeout. Don't boo. Anyway, fans don't make a lot of sense most of the time, but it seemed like in that moment, Bengals surely lost the game. They had a perfect opportunity. The fate must have been sealed, right? Bengals missed the field goal, give the ball back to the Broncos with 2.5 minutes left to go in overtime. Broncos, they have a perfect opportunity to win and or at least end the game in a tie, because the Broncos, even if they just tied the game, they would have sealed their playoff fate. They would have clinched a playoff berth if they at least tied. So it was a weird situation where the Bengals were 100% playing to win, whereas the Broncos could win or tie, and it seemed like they were playing for the tie, which was really, in hindsight, you have to question it, because they had two opportunities, actually. And the Broncos decided to go for the tie instead of the win. There was, at the very end of regulation, Marvin Mims Jr. catches a deep pass on 4th down where it seems like the Broncos are pretty much done for. Bo Nix throws up a prayer into double coverage over Mike Hilton and over Geno Stone, and he catches it, brings the ball down. It's the ball's moving around, and it's questionable whether or not he controlled it and landed inbounds, but they reviewed it. They said touchdown stands as called, good. And that gave the Broncos down by 1, 23-24. They had a decision to make at that point, whether they kick the extra point for 1 and tie it and go to overtime, or go for 2 and the victory. And the Bengals had been in that same situation against, I think it was the Ravens, right? Where they threw the pass to Tanner Hudson in that same situation, going for 2, didn't end up converting it. Bengals lost the game on that 2-point conversion, but they said they felt good about that instead of going into overtime. In this game, Sean Payton, he knew that the tie was just as good for them as the win, so he played for the tie at the end of regulation and at the end of overtime, again, playing for the tie. And that's where the lack of aggression, the conservatism came back to bite them, because they didn't pick up a first down. They were overly conservative with running the ball and just trying to run clock off. The Bengals were able to commit to stopping the run, forcing timeouts and forcing the Broncos they didn't really try to throw it. They didn't want to throw an interception that would give the ball back to the Bengals with another attempt at a short field goal. So they were basically playing for a punt. They got off a decent punt, but that gave the Bengals good field position. Joe Burrow was able to complete a long pass up the left sideline, 31 yards to T. Higgins. He was able to keep both his feet in bounds, set the Bengals up for... They could have kicked a field goal, but the Bengals decided, you know what? We just saw that from Cade York. Let's decide to throw another pass to T. Higgins over Riley Moss for the game-sealing touchdown. It wasn't even a contest all day for Riley Moss. This is the first time I've seen him play in a game, so I don't know what he normally plays like. But if this is any indication, Riley Moss might not have a very good career in the NFL, because it seemed like from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, the Bengals were going after Riley Moss, number 21, the rookie cornerback for the Broncos. He had missed a few games, the last 3 or 4 games for the Broncos with an MCL strain. I don't know if that played into it at all, but he was just overmatched, you could say, against T. Higgins. They even showed a close-up of T. Higgins after the catch. He was just saying in the camera, like, you can't hold me, or they can't hold me, they can't hold me. And basically, like, he was mossing Riley Moss on some of these plays. He was just going up over the top of him, late hands, and Riley Moss, like, couldn't even react, didn't even have a chance to break up the pass, do anything. He wasn't even able to make a play on the ball at all. So he was in okay position some of the time, but he was the leading tackler on the Broncos just because the Bengals were completing so many passes on him, and he would, let them catch it, and then he would make the tackle. So he missed a few tackles, but I mean, decent tackler, I guess, but that's not really what you want to have out of your cornerback. You want them breaking up passes, not letting the receiver catch it. A similar thing with Cam Taylor-Britt. He was the leading tackler for the Bengals, but just because they were throwing passes on Cam Taylor-Britt complete, and then he would have to tackle the guy. So similar thing, but the Broncos just they had a similar game plan to the Bengals, but they didn't have the ball as much. That's the other thing is the Bengals, they possessed the ball so much longer than the Broncos in this game. It was crazy how at halftime, I think it was like almost 20-10, like in favor of the Bengals possessing the ball. And let me check this team stats real quick here. Number of total plays, the Bengals ran 84 plays and the Broncos only ran 60 plays. And then I want to check the first half summary. So in the first half, the Bengals ran 35 plays. The Broncos only ran 24 plays. So just a huge discrepancy in terms of time of possession. Let me check the second half stats. Total plays, 34 for the Bengals, 30 for the Broncos. A little bit more even in that regard. But it was just so weird where it seems like the Bengals' offensive plan in the game was they wanted to protect their defense. It was like they knew that their defense was kind of suspect, a little bit leaky. So they were like, okay, best offense is, or I guess in this case, the best defense was a good offense. They flipped it around. The best defense is a good offense. If we just leave our offense and Joe Burrow on the field more and cover up for the fact we have a bad defense, that will prevent the other team from scoring points, which is true, but the Bengals also didn't score points. Broncos came out and had a relatively successful and efficient drive. I think Bo Nix was 4 for 4 passing on the first drive, but Bengals defense was able to get a stop in the red zone, which is unusual. They pointed out on the broadcast, Bengals defense was 31st out of 32 teams in the league in red zone touchdown percentage. So all season, teams had not had any problem scoring touchdowns. That was another instance of the Broncos. I keep wanting to call them the Saints because I keep thinking of Sean Payton and the Saints and Drew Brees, and it's so weird that he's coaching the Broncos now. But anyway, the Broncos were so not aggressive from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, so that you could see the two different styles of coaching all the way through. And it was like neither team wanted to win the game. Both of them were coaching to lose, it seemed like at some point. But Broncos, they had a 3rd and 2, and on the first drive, they had been running well, moving the ball seemed like at will. They got to a 3rd and 2 and decided to throw a fade pass that, not a great pass by Bo Nix to Cortland Sutton to the corner of the end zone. He had a size advantage on Josh Newton, but not a accurate ball by Bo Nix. So 3rd and 2, low percentage pass instead of running it for some reason. And then they decided to kick the short field goal instead of going for it on 4th and 2. It wasn't that far of a conversion to go for. I probably would, if I was offensively, if he were going back thinking about that, probably should have just ran the ball on 3rd down and or just tried to go for it on 4th down. That would have helped out get a early touchdown, because the Bengals did the same. But the thing that's weird is right after that, the Bengals on their offensive drive, they came out, they drove it down, had a long drive, and Mike Gesicki had a bunch of catches in this game. This is probably Mike Gesicki's best game as a Bengal. If I go look at the box score, Gesicki, 10 catches on 12 targets, 86 yards, long of 12. So he had 10 catches and the longest one was only 12 yards. Not a lot of yardage, no touchdowns, but he was just getting open in the zone, having easy matchups. They just didn't have, he's so big. He's like 6'6". There's not a lot of defenders out there who are big enough and long enough to be able to match up well on Gesicki. So the fact that he's stayed healthy, that's been a huge advantage and a critical part of this Bengals offensive attack. They asked Sean Payton what could they have done to kind of slow down the Bengals passing game. And I thought, the Broncos had a great plan. Their defensive coordinator obviously did a good job of coaching their defensive linemen, because their defensive ends were much more disciplined in keeping Joe Burrow contained in the pocket and not getting beyond him or behind him and allowing Joe Burrow to step up and step through and scramble out and make plays outside of the pocket. That's what he's been so dangerous at all season. The Broncos did a good job of just being patient, staying in their lanes, containing Joe Burrow, and that's how they got so many sacks, was because Joe Burrow was looking to escape. Broncos, I don't think they really let him, except for one like third down where Joe Burrow was able to scramble for like 15 or 20 yards and pick it up with his legs. But Broncos did a pretty good job of containing him, but they had no answer in coverage. Patrick Surtain II, he did a relatively good job of containing Jamar Chase to a somewhat pedestrian 9 catches on 15 targets for 102 yards, but no touchdowns, long of 38. And the one Jamar had 38 yards on was when Riley Moss was going up against him one-on-one. Or actually, it was in a zone coverage. So he just found a spot in a zone, but he was lined up over Riley Moss's area, and then Riley Moss missed the tackle on him that allowed him to get like 10 extra yards on that play. But back to this second drive by the Bengals. So the Bengals drove it all the way down. They get down, and then Bengals had a similar situation. 3rd and 2, they decided to run it up the middle with Chase Brown. So they were deciding instead of passing it like the Broncos did, they're going to run it, which they probably should have passed it because the Bengals had so much success, especially in the short game. But Joe Burrow, one of his first passes of the drive was kind of an inaccurate pass, one of the first bad balls we've seen from Joe Burrow in a while where it hit Patrick Surtain in the foot. He wasn't even looking because he was a couple steps behind Jamar Chase, and he thought the ball was going to be obviously near Jamar Chase, so he didn't expect it. He could have maybe intercepted it if he had been looking at the ball, but maybe that's why they weren't confident enough in Joe Burrow. I don't know why, but they decided to run it 2 times in a row. So Chase Brown got stuffed on 3rd and 2. They tried it again on 4th and 2, and again got stuffed again. So Chase Brown is not a great short yardage runner. We could maybe say that the offensive line isn't great at blocking, and maybe the scheme isn't necessarily the best call, but Chase Brown is not able to run through the tackles of some of those big defensive linemen when he gets stopped. And so he got stopped twice in a row. We saw that a lot. If you go back and look at the next gen stats chart of Chase Brown in the running game, he had a lot of success outside on speed sweeps or breaking it outside from a run that was up the middle, but he did not have any real positive runs up the middle. He got stuffed a number of times trying to run it inside. So the Bengals, their only success really running at all was outside with Chase Brown. If we look at Joe Burrow's passing chart, it was striking. He was, again, a lot of short passes underneath within 5 or 10 yards. And he actually, the 5-yard out route to the right, Joe Burrow actually completed like 5 passes in the exact same spot. So if the Broncos, they just didn't adapt their zone coverage to that right short side of the field, Joe Burrow completed about 15 passes basically in the same area, and the Broncos just didn't seem to have any answer for that. So if they, I'm sure if they go back and look at, they may have adjusted their coverage, but in game, it was a good cat and mouse because the Broncos were trying to blitz sometimes, but they were mixing up the coverages between man and zone. But Joe Burrow just always had an answer. He was, I think, 39 of 49. Let me go back and check the stats again. Yeah, 39 of 49, 412 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interception. Joe Burrow also had a rushing touchdown at the end of the game. That was a weird moment in the game where the Bengals almost outfought themselves. They were trying to get too cute, and instead of scoring the touchdown at the end of the game that would have given the Broncos the ball back with some time, Chase Brown tried to slide down short of the end zone. Instead of going into the end zone, he tried to slide at like the 5-yard line, but he got caught up in this turf and sprained his ankle. And it looked like it could have been a lot worse. Like, I was scared that maybe he caught his knee at a bad angle and it could have torn something and could have been much worse. But it sounds like the extent of it is not going to be anything overly serious. Just kind of sprained his ankle and probably just kind of sprained his pride, honestly, a little bit. That's not something that players practice. They don't practice sliding down and not scoring touchdown. The whole point of playing football is getting into the end zone. So it's against your nature as a football player to like slide down and not score a touchdown. So I think in hindsight, they probably should just, either just take a knee if you're going to just waste the time. Like, don't even run a play then. What's the point of running a play and then sliding? Just take it like a knee if you're just going to do that. So not a wise coaching move. But like things like that, they were asking Zach Taylor immediately after the game, and his responses would be like, well, I don't have to answer that because we won. Like, this is why I can't listen to Zach Taylor anymore. But the other thing that was a little bit weird was the penalties went a lot in the favor of the Bengals, where Bengals, if you look at first downs, the Bengals had 34 first downs to the Broncos 19. Bengals had 23 passing first downs to the Broncos 10. Bengals only had 6 rushing first downs. Broncos had 9. So much more even in terms of the Broncos getting 10 passing first downs, 9 rushing first downs. But then you look at penalties. Bengals got 5 first downs off of Broncos penalties. Broncos had 0 first downs from Bengals penalties. So the Bengals did a good job of not committing penalties, but some of the penalties they were calling, I mean, obviously, they're going to call it as they see it, but it seemed like some of the penalties were questionable on the Broncos that didn't get called. Bengals only had 3 penalties for 15 yards. Broncos had 7 penalties, only 35 yards. But it was a lot of these illegal contact penalties that are only 5 yards, but an automatic first down. That's such a harsh penalty where it was like 3rd and 15. It looked like the Broncos had stopped the Bengals, and then they get a 5-yard penalty that gives the other team an automatic first down, where the guy like bumped the receiver 10 yards down the field, illegal contact, automatic first down. That seemed a little bit harsh if I were a Broncos fan, but I'm a Bengals fan, so it was good for the Bengals. But it was like, there's no way that Cam Taylor-Britt and Josh Newton aren't also committing illegal contact penalties. Also, we just aren't able to see it on the TV broadcast because you don't really see that far down the field. I was kind of surprised that the Bengals didn't get called for any illegal contact penalties, but maybe it could have just been due to the fact that the Broncos didn't have the ball that much. And when they did, I mean, Bo Nix, for a rookie, you got to give him credit, because you keep that in mind. Like, Joe Burrow outplayed Bo Nix in this game. For sure, he was the difference between the two teams, and probably in winning the game for the Bengals was Joe Burrow. Everybody's going to say he's the MVP. I don't think it really matters. That award is, I don't get any prize money from a Joe Burrow winning MVP. I don't really care either way. But in this game, Joe Burrow was the better quarterback, slightly. But for a rookie, Bo Nix played pretty well. The only difference is Bo Nix was 24 of 31, only 219 yards. So whereas Joe Burrow threw 49 passes for 412 yards, Bo Nix 31 passes, only 219 yards. So in terms of yards per pass, Bengals, I guess, had 6.9 yards per pass to the Broncos 6.2. But a lot of it, Bo Nix threw one pass that, like a 60-yard touchdown? Like, Bo Nix threw the longest pass in the air in the NFL in the entire season in this game. It was 67 yards in the air, they said, on Next Gen Stats. And it was crazy how, if you look at the Next Gen Stats charts for Bo Nix, this pass went off of the chart, literally off the Next Gen Stats chart, because the chart ends at 55 yards down the field. The arrow on this pass goes just all the way off the end because it was so far. He threw it from the Broncos 40-yard line to the back of the end zone. So the guy caught it like 8 yards deep into the end zone. It was across the field. Crazy pass. And, sometimes I see Bo Nix complete long passes in Denver. I'm like, oh, maybe it's the altitude that helps him throw these long passes. No, this was on a humid, hot night in December in Cincinnati. So it's not like the ball was really flying out of either one of these quarterbacks' hands, but this is a bomb from Bo Nix. So unbelievable arm strength out of him. And just a little bit, I guess, in some key moments, he missed receivers, didn't quite make the best pass. But there was another, like I said, there was the other touchdown pass he threw to Mims in the end of the game. 4th down, another deep pass, rainbow into the end zone. Perfect pass that just I couldn't believe. Double coverage, and neither one of the Bengals defenders was able to make a play on it. But similar thing with Riley Moss and a bunch of catches that the Bengals had all over him. It was like T. Higgins just going up all over Riley Moss all game, it seemed like. And there was a play where early in the game, Mike Gesicki caught a pass, tried to jump up over Riley Moss and knee him straight in the side of the helmet. And Riley Moss went down onto his knees for a second, collecting himself. He was obviously, had the cobweb shaken out or whatever. Like, he was seeing stars at that moment, but he stayed in the game. And that's a moment, they say that the NFL has unaffiliated neurotrauma consultants. They're supposed to spot when a player gets hit and do an evaluation. I didn't see anybody evaluate him at any point. They just brought him a water bottle and said, "You're all good." So that was kind of lack of due diligence, I thought, by the NFL medical staff, where there's a guy, clearly he looked like he had a concussion, but they let him stay in the game. And then he played like garbage the entire game. So I don't know why the Broncos didn't sub anybody in for Riley Moss. They left him in there. But I guess maybe the alternative wasn't any better because they had been talking about how the coverage had gotten dropped last game. They were like, oh, that's some of the worst coverage I've seen out of a Broncos team. We haven't played like that all season. So maybe, he was better than what they had as the alternative. But even still, Riley Moss, that was the two stories of the game. It was positive for Joe Burrow and the fact that Joe Burrow played one of his best games of the season. But also, Broncos defensively, especially in the secondary, were giving up a lot of passing yards, a lot of open receivers, not making plays on the ball, getting mossed, specifically Riley Moss all game. So take the good with the bad. Defensively, like I said, Akeem Davis-Gaither stepped up. Mike Hilton continued to have a pretty strong game. Geno Stone, no interceptions, and he, on that one long touchdown, they threw it right over top of Geno Stone's head. Like, he had so long to react, and he's still so slow. He wasn't even within two steps of Marvin Mims. Jordan Battle got totally spun around on that route, so he wasn't able to come over and make a play. And, yeah, Jesse Bates probably would have intercepted that pass. Geno Stone was, completely bamboozled. So, defense, they had good moments. They had a couple sacks, but not nearly as many hits on Bo Nix. Bo Nix showed off his athleticism, but sometimes that came back to bite him because there was one moment, especially early in the game, I think it was a third down, where Bo Nix could have stepped up easily and scrambled out to his right, but for some reason he spun all the way around backwards outside, made it a lot harder for himself and wasn't able to convert it. So rookie mistakes like that. He threw an interception to Jermaine Pratt. Jermaine Pratt finally made a play, and he had a couple decent tackles in this game. So not terrible play out of Jermaine Pratt like we've been seeing lately, but interception, I think it was mostly due to, it was caused by two things. It was a poor decision, I think, because there was three Bengals defenders where Bo Nix was trying to throw it. He was trying to throw it on a crossing route to Cortland Sutton, and it was already a risky pass, but Joseph Osai was coming in off the right edge. Bo Nix didn't seem to have any awareness that Joseph Osai was right there, and it looked like Joseph got his hand maybe on Bo Nix's arm when he was trying to throw it. That kind of impacted the throw, made it an inaccurate pass, went right to Jermaine Pratt basically, but good play by the defensive line to get some pressure on Bo Nix. Joseph Osai was getting some pressure, making tackles, making big plays. He was stepping up in really something we haven't seen from Sam Hubbard at all. So getting any production from somebody outside of Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson was pretty quiet in this game, actually. Didn't hear his name called too much. Broncos did a pretty good job of holding Trey Hendrickson at bay with tight ends and running backs, and their left tackle did a pretty good job. I think Trey Hendrickson managed to get half a sack, so he may still have the lead in the NFL at this point, but it's coming down to a close race between Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, maybe even Zach Allen at this point. I think Zach Allen for the Broncos had 3 sacks in this game, and he leads the NFL in quarterback hits, so he probably had a bunch of quarterback hits in this game. I guess I could just go check the statistics. Defensively, Zach Allen had 3.5 sacks in this game, 6 quarterback hits on Joe Burrow just by Zach Allen himself, number 99. So huge game for him. Broncos, like I said, had 7 sacks combined. Jonathan Cooper, number 0, had 1.5, 2 quarterback hits. Bengals had only 2 sacks, one of them by Cedric Johnson, number 52, the rookie. That was a nice play by him to tackle Bo Nix. Another rookie mistake by Bo Nix. He was like scrambling around, had a perfect opportunity to do something or throw the ball away, but took a sack instead. So negative plays killed some of the Broncos' drives. Broncos, they didn't even force a Bengals punt until overtime. So part of that was the fact that the Bengals were going for it like every fourth down that they had, but also they just stayed on the field so long and never had to punt until overtime. So that was a failing by the Broncos defense. As good as they were, they kept letting the Bengals stay on the field with dumb penalties, just letting them convert too many times on third down. If I go, let's check the team stats again. Third down efficiency, Bengals were 7 for 13. Broncos were only 4 for 12. So Bengals, especially early in the game, Bengals were doing a good job of converting on third down. Fourth down, Broncos were 1 for 1. Bengals 1 for 3. So those two failed fourth downs were costly early on in the game. It almost cost the Bengals this game if the Broncos had been a little bit more conservative. I'm not sure why the Broncos didn't decide to run with Jaleel McLaughlin more often, because he had only 10 carries for 69 yards. So 6.9 a carry. He was obviously their most effective player. I don't know why they gave it to Audric Estime 9 times for 25 yards. Seemed like in hindsight you want to do a little bit more McLaughlin more consistently. Chase Brown in this game, 20 carries for 67 yards. But then after he got that ankle sprain at the end of the game, we had to see Khalil Herbert come into the game for the Bengals, number 34. And he actually had a couple decent runs. He had 4 carries for 23 yards, but he picked up a first down with a 13-yard gain where he showed a little shiftiness. So it's so weird. They traded for this guy, and I know it was kind of a bad omen in his first game. He fumbled the handoff, but Chase Brown is taking every single snap on offense. They had said up until the point where Chase Brown sprained his ankle, he had played every play for the Bengals at running back in that game, and Khalil Herbert didn't even get 1 snap. So it's going to be interesting, especially with the ankle sprain. Chase Brown said he should be okay for this game coming up against the Steelers in Week 18, but especially considering that, we maybe want to get a little bit more Khalil Herbert in there, mix it up a little bit, add everything you got. We also saw plays from Andre Yossi-Vash. There was one where it looked like he fumbled. I think they called it incomplete initially, but then they looked at it again. They called it a catch. Then the Broncos challenged it because they wanted to say it was either incomplete or a fumble. But Andre he was able to complete the catch. I think that was his long of 26 yards. Andre was the fastest Bengal in this game. I want to say he got up to over 20 miles an hour. I think it was about 20.5, somewhere in that area. So 20 and a half miles an hour. The only criticism I have for Andre, I've said this before, he did this in the preseason, or maybe it was the end of last season. He caught the ball and ran away from the defenders. He had blocking. Nobody was going to come up and hit him out of bounds, and then he just ran out of bounds on his own without being touched. Instead of trying to turn it upfield and tiptoe up the sidelines, gain extra yards, and making someone force him to go out of bounds. That is my pet peeve. If nobody forces you to go out of bounds, don't just run out of bounds. Unless you're trying to save clock. It wasn't a situation where the Bengals needed to stop the clock for a field goal, go out of bounds, something like that. They had plenty of time. There was no reason for him to just run out of bounds like this. So he had an opportunity later in the game where it looked like he was going to score a wide open touchdown, but he got called back by a penalty that negated the touchdown. So he could have had, I think, a bigger game, but he's got to, like I said, I know he's a track guy. Maybe he wants to avoid contact, but in situations where you got blocking out in front of you, they're not blocking, so you can just run out of bounds. Maybe he'll learn that. Like Jamar Chase, for example. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Jamar Chase would do that if he was tired, but I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know why Andre would just run out of bounds like that. Go upfield. But anyway, they won the game, so that's all that mattered. There's a couple other guys caught passes. Drew Sample, 1 catch for 3 yards. Cam Grandy, 1 catch for 7 yards. they keep trying to throw it to these tight ends who don't do anything. But Mike Gesicki is really the only tight end they should be throwing to. Chase Brown added 4 catches for 24 yards, but this actually broke his streak of games with over 100 yards from scrimmage because Chase Brown had 67 yards on the ground, 24 receiving, so that's a total of 91. So 91 yards, not quite 100, obviously. Only a long of 9 yards from Chase Brown. 20 carries, long of 9, 3.4 yards per carry. So not nearly as good as Jaleel McLaughlin, 6.9 yards per carry. Again, only long of 13, so he didn't have a ton of huge runs, but a lot of 12 and 13-yard runs at points in that game. Confusing why the Broncos didn't decide to run him more. But like I said, penalties, bad decisions by Bo Nix, and maybe just some strange coaching decisions by Sean Payton. But Bengals got the win. That's all we can ask for. And they're going to be playing meaningful football all the way up until the end. So as heartbreaking as moments of the season have been as a Bengals fan, at least they're still in it. They still have a chance, and it's much better than these teams who are hoping that their team loses so they get a better draft pick. There's so many teams that are basically tied at the bottom with 3 wins. The number, or whichever way you want to look at it, the first pick in the draft is going to go to the worst team. So the number 32 team in the league right now is the New England Patriots, who have 3 wins, one of which comes against the Bengals in week 1, we all know. But there's a lot of teams whose fan bases are wanting them to lose. They're like, don't screw this up and win, which is a terrible position to be in. You never want your team to lose. That was the position a lot of Bengals fans were in when they were in position to draft Joe Burrow. It was like, don't screw this up and go winning games, Bengals. You need to lose. I know I will admit, they were playing that game against the Dolphins that went into overtime and that crazy Hail Mary from Andy Dalton. And the whole time I was just thinking, no, you cannot win this game, Bengals. What are you doing? Lose the game, please. And everything worked out. They lost the game. They got Joe Burrow, and the rest was history. But you don't want to be in that position because you don't want your team to lose. You want to win. So I hope the Bengals get a win this week against the Steelers, but that'll be for the next podcast. We'll say that this podcast has been long enough, but if you've listened this far, don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, rating, all the business to help grow the show, because I'm not advertising anything. I'm not promoting anything. I'm just talking about the game as I see it as a Bengals fan and the fan of football. I'm also, a little bit of a fantasy football player, so I watch the game from a fantasy perspective to try to see who's good, who's making plays, who's not. But I like to see, just evaluate everybody and see what they're doing. We also, before I go, we got to say special teams for the Bengals were also excellent in the fact of Ryan Rico, the one punt that he did have, his only punt came in overtime and that pinned the Broncos deep. I think it was fair catch at the 10-yard line. So that was part of the reason why the Broncos were a little bit more conservative, because a good punt out of Rico forced them into negative field position. They didn't want to take any chances. So good job that. And Jermaine Burton, who Kevin Harlan initially called Jerome Burton, but then he came back and corrected himself and said Jermaine Burton a couple times just to emphasize that he corrected it. Jermaine Burton, number of good kickoff returns, including a 41-yard return on the final touchdown drive the Bengals had in the fourth quarter that set up that drive. So good job out of Jermaine Burton contributing, even though he's not getting any real snaps on offense because the Bengals they've already got enough receivers between T, Jamar, Yosivach, and now Gesicki. There's not enough room out there for everybody. So Jermaine Burton can stay on the sidelines for now until they need him, and then just worry about special teams. Maybe he can cover. Well, he's returning punts. Maybe he can cover, but he's at least contributing. That's more than we can say for some of these other rookies. Charlie Jones, he's not a rookie, but Charlie Jones. Anyway, Bengals, they're playing for something, and that's more than we can say about what it looked like just a few short weeks ago. It looked like the season was going down the tubes in a hurry, so at least the Bengals have brought it back to within some kind of decent ending. Now, this is going to be their 8-8 going into the last game, so it'll be a kind of a season deciding whether it's a winning season or a losing season. It could theoretically get a tie, but that would stink. But hopefully they get the win. And even if they win, they won't necessarily make it into the playoffs because the Broncos could still go to the playoffs if they win against the Chiefs. And even if that doesn't happen, the Dolphins could still get to the win and go into the playoffs instead of the Bengals. So a lot of different things could happen. Even if the Bengals win, they're not necessarily guaranteed to make it. Chiefs are probably going to be resting their starters, so they might semi-lose intentionally just so the Bengals don't get into the playoffs because they don't want to play against the Bengals because obviously Joe Burrow is playing at the highest level, and if you have a quarterback that's playing at the highest level, then that's really hard to stop for any team. Like Sean Payton said, got to give the Bengals credit. You know, they asked him, why couldn't you stop Joe Burrow? It's like, well, I mean, they got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and all these guys. Like, they get paid too, you know. It's hard to stop those guys when they're the best in the league. So we'll have to see if the Bengals make it in. But at least we get to enjoy some wins. Got to see a win at home for, I think, the third time this season. But I hope you enjoyed this game. I hope you enjoyed this episode. That's all for now. I'm going to leave you with a hoo-day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.